Great. Good afternoon and welcome to RESTful APIs 201. My name is Sean Simpson and I'm a senior systems engineer here at Veeam, working for the Veeam Cloud Service Provider Organization, and I'll be monitoring today's webinar. And for today's webinar, if you have any questions, you can post those in the question area. And as we're going through today's presentation, we will be answering those questions. And before we conclude the presentation, we will make sure we answer those. And if we have to follow up with any offline, we will. Our presenter today is Chris Archino. He is a solutions architect on the Veeam Cloud and Service Providers team. And Chris specializes and works specifically around developing automation and APIs for our service providers. So at this point, I'm going to turn this over to Chris, and he's going to take you through RESTful APIs 201. Chris, take it away.
Thanks a lot, Sean. Much appreciated. To get things started off, I'd like to first point out this is a continuation of another webinar that we had almost a couple years ago now, whenever I first started at Veeam, entitled RESTful APIs 101. It should have been included a link to the recording. I recommend that those who haven't watched that, not now obviously, but after this session, to go ahead and go watch that. We had a lot of fun doing that, and here I'm going to be focusing more not on the basics of actually like working with our APIs. However, the next level up, where you have an understanding of our APIs and you actually want to go do the thing. You want to write something custom, as a service provider to set you apart from the pack, right? To bring a unique offering to alongside the Veeam offerings that you're providing today. So what we're going to do for this is we're going to go through these steps as you see here. I'm not going to be touching a lot on specific APIs and whatnot, but what I'm going to be doing is sharing with you a system that I have used throughout my years in developing automation, which I hope will be a benefit for you too. We're going to start it, and you're going to notice that a lot of these steps, especially as we're going through them, have a lot of project management type, sprints, agile, those definitions I'm sure you're aware of in mind for whenever it comes to writing and architecting an automation like this. So we're going to go through each one of these steps to a certain level of detail. And as Sean mentioned, as we're going along, please feel free to ask questions. So on with our first topic of architecting a custom integration. So you see the different things that Veeam APIs are able to do. You see that what Veeam products are able to do, right? And you're like, hey, I want to automate that. I want to do something cool, right? And so the first question that really needs to be answered is does this custom automation really need to be architected? And first thing you'll notice over here is my meme, okay? And due to certain copyright type stuff, you're going to see a lot of memes like this today. So bonus points to you if you could figure out what the original meme was. But the answer to this question is yes. Yes, custom automations need to be architected. If they're not, they will suffer greatly. And I've listed to the left here a lot of some of the benefits that come from architecting the solution. I think the number one for most of our partners is going to be quicker time to market, right? The more agile, the quicker you can be, that's where you get your edge. And by doing this work, and up front of doing this of building this architecture, you're making it much easier down the road. The finished product is more likely to come out as what all parties had in mind from the beginning. You're going to prevent that rework. You're going to catch your issues early on so that you don't end up finding out those issues once your automation has reached production. And finally, something that's really big when it comes to these custom integrations, which sometimes tends to be left by the wayside, is the documentation for that. So doing all this up front helps those efforts further down the road. So with that in mind, what's really involved in architecting a custom integration? So we touched on documentation, okay? And so in this phase, the architecture phase, you're not writing any code. So that's something very clear to put up front. You're not writing any code in this architecture phase. You're focusing on a few key points, right? As far as like documentation, like what is the integration going to accomplish? What are you trying to do? Very important point here is business requirements. You know, I'm going to share with y'all a custom integration that I wrote specifically for this webinar today, but I just took into some business requirements. I can guarantee you that before you would put the sample that I'm going to provide you today in production, there are other business requirements that the company you work for are going to want to tack on top of that, and that's fine. Every business has different requirements. So listing those out right now up front before code is written, okay, is going to make it so that when you get to the end and you're going through QA and review process, that on the back and you're like, hey, what about this? I wanted to provide this to the customers in this integration, which could cause a whole lot of rework depending on what that thing they wanted to provide was. One thing that we will document in this step is what are the manual steps required to do, we'll say it, the thing, which is your custom integration. What are you trying to do, right? And the manual steps, as I'll show you in just a minute, is as easy as going in to a console, or in this case, in Veeam Service Writer console, a web UI, and documenting in the web UI, what do I do to make this happen, right? There's no automation involved in that. You're just documenting what's manual today that you would like automated. Also included in this, which I feel is really useful and helpful, is a visual representation of what this integration is going to be, namely the workflow of it, starting from top to finish. And it's okay if it's super basic. As I'll show you momentarily, that visual representation starts very simple. And then as you're going along, you can build upon that. It makes things easier because not everyone that's going to be stakeholders in this custom integration are always going to be automation people or technology, or tech minded, but they understand things from a business perspective. So having this workflow built out really helps all parties involved to have a better mental image of what's involved and what the finished product is going to look like. So let me show you. So first we talked about the manual steps required, and that's pretty straightforward. In this integration that we're talking today, we're talking about automating provisioning for a Cloud Connect customer. So in that case, you're in here, you're in Service Writer console, you click new, right? And you fill out all this information, and then you finish. And then at the end of it, that account is provisioned, okay? And you could go into step-by-step of the things that you want to automate that you do today manually, going through each one of these steps and listed out there, it would be, here's all the manual steps. What benefit does this provide? Well, sometimes when it comes to APIs, things will be one-to-one, right? However, sometimes, like in the case of this workflow right here, while you get a handy dandy wizard that does it all for you, there are multiple API calls here involved, which is fine for this phase. You don't need to know the API calls, but by you listing those down, whenever we're in our next phase of discovery, as we'll discuss, you're gonna identify these API calls so that you have a more clear picture from the API side on what you need to do. On the flip side, we talked about the workflow. So here, oops, that's for something else. Here is the workflow. Here's a very basic workflow. I'm using Lucidchart here today. There's other products. There's Visio, there's others. I like to use Lucidchart, so here's what I'm going to show you today. And this is just a very simple workflow. And as you'll see, it's very, very simple. I want the automation to start out by a web form being submitted by the customer. That form is analyzed. We have some decision information here. You know, account provisioning begins. Notice there's not a lot of details in this right here. It lumps everything in account provisioning. And as we'll see, there's a number of steps involved in this. And then at the end, it's, hey, was it created successfully? No, boom. Yes, okay, we're gonna go through our success. And that's all we needed for our initial architecture design. And I'm not gonna say like for a finalized design, but this is like this is what I would do initially. It doesn't have tons of detail because you don't know a whole lot about it yet. You just know you want to do something. So past this, now we go into the proof of concept phase. So at this point, your custom integration is just a nugget of an idea, okay? You don't even know if it's gonna work. You don't even know if APIs exist to do the thing that you want to do. You just know it's possible to do it using the GUI, doing it manually. And so you say, hey, I really wanna automate this. Can I automate it? Okay, and you've got this information that where you've done this initial work that we just discussed to outline what all of that means. So what is the proof of concept? Really, this is the discovery phase. This is where you've got your project somewhat defined, okay, but it's not well defined. It's not super clear. We haven't specified a lot of details yet because there's a whole lot of unknowns. So this area is really for you to go and perform discovery. And at this point, here's where you're reviewing your workflow chart. You're seeing what manual steps were documented, and you're going to identify what API calls do what things. What API calls do I need to use in order to fully accomplish this? Do they exist? And during all of this, you're documenting all of this information. Okay, you found the different API calls that need to be used. You copy the links to them. If you find any potential roadblocks, you make those, you specify those. Okay, this is what's going to allow you to estimate how long this project that you're working on, this sprint, will take you to complete. So that you can estimate how long it is till you have a functioning product that can be put or added to your offering. During this information, where are you documenting all this? There are many agile tools out there. I've used a few. I think Pivotal Tracker has been one of my favorites, but it really depends on the team that you're working for. If there's tools already out there, most of those agile type of project type tools will work for what you need. And it's in it's in this section where whenever you're documenting all that you're also going to go out there and start defining what work needs to be completed for this entire project. So you learn that all the different API calls that are used, the different steps, okay, and you start divvying out that work. So the question is, well, how do I divvy out the work, right? I mean, I don't want to be the only person working on this. This assumes you're working in a team. If you're working by yourself, it's still good to create this stuff because it gives you not only for yourself some structure, but it also provides something that you can show to those who are looking after your work to show, hey, look, I'm making progress. But it's super useful when working in a team because it allows multitasking. And how does that occur? that occurs by separating out the work. And I'll give you a visual representation of what that can be. So here's the project that I'm going to demo for you today, the custom integration that I wrote. Okay. And notice I have functions to do a whole lot of things. Okay. Generating a password, retrieving information, checking for duplicates, right? Every single one of these functions has an input and it has an output. Okay. And you can totally multitask your work by assigning, so and so please write this function, so and so please write this function, and in the end, and then surrounding that, you're going to say, here's what I want the input to be. In this case, we're going to say the password length. Okay. I want it to support, these number of characters. Okay. And then I want it to return a string with the password, right? That's how I would write this one out. And a developer can take that with those requirements, and they can produce the work. It needs to be written in PHP in this case, right? And that allows people to multitask. In the end, you're not necessarily writing code, but an understanding of how APIs work is definitely required for this discovery, because you're looking through and trying to identify all the API calls that you're going to need, and you're delving in to see what information is required for them. Key thing to note here is this step is not you writing the entire custom integration rough draft style, right? It doesn't mean that you've got some loose things working at the end. All it means is that you've clarified, you've discovered information, you've clarified what the project itself, what this custom integration itself, what all it entails. Okay, you've got even more information. And truthfully, at the end of this phase, you know one thing. You can confidently say, we can do this. Okay, I've identified the API calls. I know they exist. I know it's possible, right? And B, you've identified enough of the work that needs to be completed. And so, depending on your team's metrics that you use for work, identifying how quickly people work and how much long work takes to get done, it should be enough information for you to accurately estimate when the project completion date is. And this is when project managers get all happy, right? Because they get a better idea of when things can happen and when they can expect things to happen. At that point, we're on to our next phase, which is development. Yes, development is where we are doing the thing, right? We're actually writing code at this point. Whether it's just you, because you're a rock star, right? Or it's a team, everyone can begin doing their thing. All the work has been already written out, right, in your agile tool. If that's Pivotal Tracker, that's Pivotal Tracker. And now you can actually work on your code. For me, this meant going out and writing all of these different functions. For those that might be aware, several years ago, another coworker at Veeam wrote a project out there on Veeam Hub where we keep our community-based sample code out on GitHub, github.com/Veeam Hub. And I took this project, which was originally working with Enterprise Manager RESTful API, and I converted this project to use our new standard, which is the Veeam Service Provider Console API. And so not only do you get the goodness here that you're auto provisioning your Cloud Connect tenants, those tenants in the end get a better user experience, because now not only can they add their Cloud Connect, so they not only can they add a service provider to Veeam Backend Replication and be able to send their backups and replications and whatnot there, but they'll be provided their credentials that they can use to log into Veeam Service Provider Console's web UI as well, giving them further information into their environment and their Cloud Connect information. So I guess the first thing to do is always check to see if someone has written something similar, right? Always stand on the shoulders of others. That's what open source code is about. And if there's a project out there that's already doing what you want, or in this case, something that's shared that gets you a good portion of the way, you can use this code that I'm providing to you as that jumping stone, that stepping stone, right? To get you to market that much faster.
And Chris, I guess that's the old adage, right? Work smarter, not harder, right? Because then you can
Always.
take something that's already there and make it your own and run with it.
You know what? And that's the key, Sean. Make it your own. Okay. It's one thing to just take code, okay, and throw it out there. And sometimes that works. Most of the time, though, what you'll find with code that you take, it might do 80 or 90% of what you want to do. It rarely does 100%. Okay.
Exactly.
Yes, slash, depending on where you work, there might be certain coding standards and whatnot, and not all code shared is clean code.
Yes.
So.
It's like a puzzle, right? And I can attest many times that you've provided my service providers with, here's an example of how something could be written. You didn't say, here, take this and use it, but this will get you started. So we can all appreciate that. Great stuff.
Thank you, Sean. So now you have a working written automation. Okay, it does the thing. It goes out there. It does it. So at this point, now we're at testing. And this is a very key thing that I'm sure everyone who has written automation, even a little bit can attest to, is you got to test. Because automation is only as good as the amount you've tested it. And automation will always work if things fall within the parameters that you've tested and defined. However, whenever you step outside of those parameters, maybe information's different or some special character was introduced or whatnot, that's where testing and debugging and error checking come into play and are crucial from your automation just doing something, but being really resilient and shiny.
And I guess, Chris, it's
So,
okay to find mistakes when you test, right? Because we all learn from mistakes.
well, it's not just that. You want to find mistakes, right? Okay. The problem is not testing like this guy. Okay. Not testing and then finding out those mistakes once things are in production. Because when the mistakes are found in production, whether it's small or big, it almost always relates to some sort of issue. Whether it's you lost a customer, which is an extreme example, but can happen, okay, or an SLA wasn't met, or something to that effect, okay. So you don't want to test your code in production. If anything about the whole DevOps movement and all that for the past years and years has taught us is shorten that feedback loop, right? And do your testing. Automate it if possible, so that you can keep increasing the
Great
frequency of those
advice.
sprints.
Great advice.
So the question is, which tools can help in this process? Well, I've already mentioned a few. Project management tool is key. Specifically, and this is one your developers will like, one that was made for development progress project management. Pivotal Tracker's one. There are many out there. They're also referred to as agile tools because of the methodology that's followed there. But there's a lot of them. Whenever you look at them, the way that that's designed, they really have project management in mind. And anyone who's a developer knows that a lot of your workflow, it's centered around projects like that. So that's key, is having the right tool. Okay, and not all tools are created equal. You want to analyze, if you don't have a tool today, or even if you already do, is it working for you? Is it working for your developers? Okay, can they easily comment, put snippets of code? Maybe even has integration with your CI/CD or tool or version control tool, GitHub, GitLab, whatnot. Those kind of things will help out greatly. Also, we also mentioned talking about like having a visual representation of your automation. For me, I shared an example of Lucidchart. Okay, you could use Visio, and there are other programs out there as well, similar to those. And keep in mind that all of this information, whether it's documentation or the workflow chart, they're not going to waste by no means, because in the end, the key is for all of this information is going to always be accessible in this tool. And then I'm sure part of the deliverables for the project is going to be some set standard documentation as well. But let's think about the workflow chart. Think about a new hire comes in, because you always write automation and documentation, not for yourself, but for the person that comes after you. And so by having this information, think about a new hire comes in and he needs to update or debug this custom integration that you built. Well, there's definitely a knowledge gap there, right? He's got he could go through all the code, which depending on what the project is, could be thousands of lines of code. Or if you have a workflow chart, he could easily look and see, here's what's being done. Maybe even there's some details saying, hey, this is happening in this file or whatnot. And so he gets a mental image of what all's going on. And then he goes, it's like, you know what, I think this is the area in the workflow where it's breaking down. I'm going to go here, right? And so this kind of architecture that we talked about at the beginning is the effects are long reaching for helping you and your company. So now we'll take a pause, because the next piece is showing links and references to everything that we discussed here today. And I want to show the custom integration that I built for y'all. Now, I already showed a little bit of the code off a little bit earlier. But so here we have what we're logged into Service Provider Console in my lab. And then we have, and I'll go ahead and refresh, because this is the demo portal. Not the prettiest thing in the world, but that's not the idea. I mean, chances are, even if I would have made it like super pretty, y'all would have redesigned it when you actually went to put it in production anyway. I mean, you can change the width of all these fields. You can add more fields. There's a good chance you will want to add more fields. I mean, Service Provider Console itself, we saw when you're creating a company, okay, there's a lot of different information, okay, that can be entered in here. I mean, descriptions and, all kinds of information. And here, for simplicity, we have the bare minimum right here. So if I go ahead and enter some information here, and I'll go ahead and check both, saying, hey, I want backup and replication. Okay, and now it started provisioning. In my environment, lab environment, I think with both of those involved, I think it takes somewhere between 2 and 3 minutes. Key thing to note is if for whatever reason the partner or the customer gets disconnected or whatever, like we're gonna demo right now, it doesn't stop the automation process from going. All that's happening via PHP, so it's happening on the back end right now. So if I go here and we refresh, we're starting to build stuff. See, we're creating a site resource and whatnot. While that's happening, I'll go a little bit deeper into what's happening behind here. So here's the company creation, and it just requires a company name here. And there's other information that's very useful, for you and your company to have on file. Now you're selecting the type of Cloud Connect tenant. For those familiar with Cloud Connect, you've got native, and then you have the Cloud Director accounts. The way I've written it right now, this integration is specifically for native. You could totally and very easily update what I've written to support vCloud Director type tenants as well. Here is the information for your Cloud Connect tenant. So here's the username that's going to be created for that tenant, password. You can even control description information and whatnot. And all of this is going to be visible within Cloud Connect itself. Oh. I kind of glossed over, but we can support multiple sites. I just heard an email, so I have a successful account creation now. And then Cloud Backup Resources, Cloud. So essentially, we've got one API call to create the company itself. We have another API call to create the Cloud Connect tenant. Okay. We've got another API call to create backup resources. We have another API call to create replica resources. Okay. And that's not including information that we've retrieved. Okay. In the automation itself, we had, the way I wrote it is you can specify, friendly name of Cloud Connect server. So vcc.arsenal.lab, as we saw here. Okay. For the resources, the way I wrote it, you specify the friendly name default backup repository. Okay. And it does all that for you. And so this is the kind of stuff that you'd find in the discovery process. And now you notice we have an active, fully created account based off the information with one administrator. So if I go edit this account, what we're going to see is company name, Veeam Software, like I listed, email address as I listed, and then these notes were generated off of other information. For the user, notice I had requested CRSNO. Password was automatically generated for me using that function y'all saw. Okay, I also enabled it so that we could have account expiration. And by default, I put 3 months out. So 3 months out from today is October 8th, 2021. And then we scroll down, we see, because I remember I checked both backup and replication resources, that we have 10 gigabytes, which I set here. And then for the replica, we have the hardware plan specified. So move that over to the code, and what you're looking at here is the actual high level process of what I did. I'm checking for duplicates. I'm retrieving the information I told you. I'm setting the tenant description based off of the full name and the company name that was specified in the form data. I'm using this variable here, which is in the configuration file. Whenever you look up this information in GitHub later on, in my documentation, I explain what all these different files are for. Okay. And then I'm creating the company, creating the Cloud Connect tenant or site in this case, right? If I selected for the tenant to be disabled, I'm doing that. And I'm going all the way through. And at the very end, I'm saying, hey, was it successful or not? So let's go back to our automation real fast. Let's say I wanted to create the exact same thing again. Okay. And if I go to create, notice very quickly we have an account provisioning failure. Now, purposefully, I didn't put a lot. Matter of fact, the way I wrote this automation today is any failure whatsoever results in this message visible to the customer. Okay. And there's security reasons for doing that. Feel free to change it as you like, but any failure whatsoever in the workflow responds with this. Okay, if you went and checked the PHP error logs, which is where all errors show up for this project because it's written in PHP, I've included error handling, which would have more detailed information about what the error was. So if we go look for check for duplicates, because here's the function that failed, because I know it did. In the error log, you would have seen duplicate company found, terminating account creation, right? And I included error handling like this for all of these different functions. So when it comes to debugging, you know where to look, right? Once again, that goes back to the testing. You need to test, have QA try different things, right? If there's one thing that I know security, whenever they're reviewing this, will probably come up with is there's very little sanitization checking for the form itself. This form, I'm not performing a whole lot of checks on right now. And so you'd want to, make sure, let's say you're back in, instead of using the configuration file you're using SQL Server or something. You're going to want to make sure that this input here is sanitized so someone doesn't try to inject a SQL query or something in your automation. So I also introduced a debugging function so that if I just don't put anything in any of here and I go click create, and this is for testing purposes only, I included some defaults, which I'll show you here. So this is Veeam Hub, Veeam Cloud Connect is where this is at. And so if I go to the config file, here's the configuration file. Notice I put default form values, which you don't have to set, right? These were, like it says here, these are testing purposes only. This was so I didn't have to, every time I was testing, keep typing stuff in, right? I could just click create and it would automatically populate information for me. I did include, as you'll see around, not most of these don't have to be edited, what you'll see here, but I wanted to give a little bit more flexibility built into the sample that I'm providing you. So like, for instance, one of the things you'll find is I have 3 different types of error messages, or not error messages, response messages for you. One is the one that we're about to see shortly, okay, which is account provision successfully, you'll receive an email shortly. Okay, this is where an email is immediately sent out. If this account was marked to be disabled, as it mentions here, then the account then this message would have been responded with. This assumes that, hey, the account's disabled. Maybe you're going to have an engineer or someone from operations on your side review their request and then enable the account, right? And then maybe they'll manually send out a welcome email or whatnot. And that's what this message is for. And then, like I mentioned before, every single error message, as far as customer facing, is this one right here. So I just got my email for the other account. I'm going to show y'all. This email is the default email that's built in to Veeam Service Writer Console. I did nothing to customize this. This is like the default one. And notice we have username, password. We have a link which will take us to the Service Writer Console instance. Information on how excuse me. Information on how Service Writer Console can manage Veeam agents for them. If you wanted to add a service writer, right, in our VBR console, it includes the information on how to do that. And so this is the email that comes out, and we can test it. We can take this account that was newly created, okay, and I'll refresh here so you can see that. Oh, look, you already see it there, default company name. And we're going to open up incognito so I don't have to log out and log back in. And we're going to log in as the tenant using those credentials that were just provided to us. So copy paste, copy paste. One of the key things that you'll be able to use this project for as well, maybe you don't want to use any code from the project, which is totally your prerogative. But one thing that you will see in this project is methodology. Okay, you'll see all the different things that had to be done to successfully provision a Cloud Connect tenant using the Service Provider Console API. So if you get nothing out of it whatsoever, at least you have an example now that you can definitively use to point you in the right directions on what API calls are necessary and required for this type of custom integration. And now we're logged in. And so I'm going to go ahead and close this out. I have these two companies here, and I'm just going to go ahead and delete them now. But so that's it. I'll go back to shortly after this session. You will be receiving the slides for this session, as well as at some point there will be also a recording for if you wanted to share this session with any of those that missed it. And you'll get all the links. This link up here, Cloud Connect RESTful API demo, is a link to Veeam Hub, to the custom integration that I just demoed for you. You can also just go to veeamhub.io, and since I recently did a commit, it'll be like one of the first projects up there, Veeam Cloud Connect, and you'll be able to use it. Must-haves for everyday use, Veeam documentation. I don't know if you noticed this or not, but even in my own personal browser, Veeam docs are right at the top. They're at a shortcut right here for me. Okay, our API documentation is good, and we're constantly improving it. Okay, I've worked on so many different products throughout my career that had little to no documentation. One thing I'll note, if there is something that you find that you want updated, we have feedback links at the bottom left of every single one of these pages, and you can ask for clarification or ask for improvement. But this is like my Bible when it comes to Veeam products, because whether it's APIs, PowerShells, that's the go-to, right? I'll reiterate, I recommend that you look into the RESTful API 101. One of the things that I touch on is using Swagger UI and Postman in your development process. I used both of those in my development process for the custom integration that I shared with you here today. With that said, that's what I wanted to demo. Sean, are there any other questions out there?
Don't see any questions other than just a thank you. But I guess if anyone on the call today has any questions, they can reach out to their systems engineer and solutions architect. We have the ability to engage you on specific questions, concerns that maybe go a little bit deeper into the weeds from that standpoint, or as we do often, we email you with questions and we can get those answers. So if there's any specific cases where a service provider might want to do some automation around what we talked about today, or anything a little bit more in depth, I know that you enjoy having those conversations, and we're more than happy to, start those off with your systems engineer and solutions architect, and then engage Chris where needed. But I think today was a great overview and a great follow-up from the first session. So if for some reason they didn't see the first session, right, Chris, there's probably a link somewhere to that, and they can rewatch this.
Yeah, there should have been a link in the invite email that you got for this session. If not, you just go back and I'll ask that a link be included to all recorded webinars that we had along this track.
One question here in regards to compatibility. I do see some questions here. Let me see if I can expand these better. Here we go. Let's see here. Let's see. How to approach when a new version is coming to be released to prepare the code to be compatible with an upgrade?
That's a totally valid question. The key there is having a lab environment. Okay. So, lab environment is one, and a change log is two, right? Now, in the past, we haven't had a change log for our APIs. However, starting with the most recent versions earlier this year, we've provided change logs for our APIs, and so One is review those change logs, right? See if any of the API calls that you use in your automations, if they're mentioned in the change log, okay? Now, with Service Writer Console, there was an even bigger thing because we had a totally new version of the API come out with version 5 of Service Writer Console. Completely different, complete rewrite using the latest framework version for Swagger. And that's the first step, is just doing that comparison. Okay. The next step is actually, loading up that updated version in your lab, and then, applying your, testing your custom integration against it. Okay. The same QA process, testing process that we discussed, that's what you're going to do again for every version like that, especially major versions. Minor versions, a lot of times you don't need to do as much, but it's still recommended. But especially major versions for any product, you need to go through that testing phase again, because APIs are already always updated, they're always improved. And so the first step should be change log, review that. Number 2, test in your lab, and against those different varieties. And with that, you can be very confident that whenever you go to step 3 of actually doing the upgrade in production, you will have already identified any changes that might need to be upgraded at the same time for those supporting automations.
Okay, Chris, there's a couple other questions here that just came in here towards the end. So this one is talking about being able to automate client trial account onboarding. They're basically stating, we're not programmers. Any suggestions on where we can get this customized for our needs? So I guess if they're not necessarily programmers, but they have the need for automation, any suggestions or ideas on how they can go about maybe getting a little bit more help with that from that perspective?
Getting a programming resource.
Yeah, that's what it was.
One step is, there's totally samples available here, just like the one I provided for you today, that will work. The problem with that comes in is if you don't have someone, even in a contractor type sense, that understands what's going on under the hood, you're putting yourself in a bad situation because you can't directly support the code that you're running for your offering. So whenever you use open source projects, you need someone either on staff or at least as a contractor that you have a relationship with that can support you with that. I provide support on a best effort basis, but this is something else that I did outside of my work. This is a community project. The idea is that you will take this project, you will make it your own, which means updates. Maybe instead of just supporting one backup repository, you want to support multiple. Maybe you have multiple Cloud Connect sites versus just one. Maybe, like I mentioned before, you're using VMware Cloud Director and you want to support, Cloud Connect tenants that are, Cloud Director type. All of these things are things that can be done to modify what I have provided as a sample for you.
Yeah, and if they talk with their solutions engineer, solutions architect, territory manager, there might be, they might have, you'd be able to provide them with some outside resources, right, outside of Veeam that they can work with, or if maybe another service provider's worked with someone who does it more on a per diem basis or something to that effect, if they don't have the resources internally from that perspective. And the only other question here, do you have any examples of C+ in Veeam Hub, or they put C# in Veeam Hub, but that doesn't seem right, so I don't know.
That's C#, buddy.
I'm looking at,
yeah,
I can't see.
No, I understand.
C#.
I think there's some stuff, but not a whole lot. What I will mention, and it's not C#, it's .NET. A lot of people don't realize that for Veeam Service Writer Console version 5, another thing that was kind of provided under, not really publicized too much, is a .NET client. So it's an already written .NET client. So any of those, any partners that already are writing .NET in there, which .NET clients can be used in PowerShell as well, then that's something else you could look into which provides you that already pre-built client that handles asynchronous actions and whatnot. As you'll see in the workflow that I wrote, there are a few steps, like creating the Cloud Connect tenant, creating the company itself, where you don't get an immediate response, you get an asynchronous response, which is common in development. And that client, that .NET client, has functionality built in on how to handle that. Otherwise, you have to do like I did, which you'll see in my code, where I wrote the proper coding logic around that, so I knew how to handle it, wait for the proper response, and then continue on. But yeah, .NET.
Then there was a question here regarding release of an Office 365 portal, not, I guess around automation coding, and we know that a small version of a portal is going to be coming out in version 6 of backup for Office 365. And correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, I believe it's just going to be pretty basic, but it'll have the basic functionality of what is needed to do a recovery from an end user perspective. Not a ton of bells and whistles, but that's coming. And let me see if there's
Correct.
any other questions here that I might have missed. What's this here? Let's see here. Relationships between all API calls in version 3, similar to a database relationship chart. Would you have, or in development, a chart showing the relationship between all API calls in version 3, similar to a relationship chart? I don't know.
I don't believe anything like that exists today. What I have heard that coming up with our next version, version 6, which should be out some point in time in the near future. No date specified to me. I have heard that we're going to have at some form of comparison like that. I don't know to what extent. I think it's for maybe demonstrating how to do common things, kind of like I demonstrated here today for onboarding. I will say this, one of the things that I do to learn the API, see where things match up, is I use Swagger, right? So that's one of the links in my, you can find it in the documentation too. All of our APIs support the Swagger UI. Okay, and in all of the different Veeam documentation, there's got a section explaining on how to use Swagger if you're not familiar with the process, and it provides you a visual representation where you can go poke around and see what's available versus going and reading the documentation, right? And that's what I do to find the metrics that I want and whatnot. But completely valid. It's like I had mentioned before, it's a brand new API. The key thing is nomenclature is pretty much identical, so that can be a guide. The other thing that I'll mention as something that was useful for me, is one of the things that we added in V3 API was another construct above the cloud, the Service Writer Console company. It's called an organization, and you'll see that in the API. You won't see that in the UI, you'll see it in the API. There's an organization, and an organization houses 3 types of organizations. It houses companies, so that's where your Service Writer Console companies comes into play. It houses resellers, and then it houses the provider themselves. And so whenever you poll the organizations, that's what you'll see is those 3 types. And so that should help you navigate when you're saying, oh, what's an organization? What's a company, right? I think the other piece that I'll mention, and you'll see it in my code as well, is that you're like, well, how does the Cloud Connect tenant, like, I want to create the tenant. How does the tenant fall into place? The tenant is a Cloud Connect tenant is a Cloud Connect site. Oh, looks like I need to block my, there we go. It's a Cloud Connect site in Service Writer Console.
Great. And I think the only last reference here was, I think you talked about it a little bit with the Swagger and being able to reference the Veeam console menu items related to API calls. And like you mentioned, Chris, the best way to do that is to kind of play around with it and see what's going on.
for the most part, nomenclature is the same, right? That there is some differences whenever it could, but like even in V2, remember V2 API, you would say, get tenants, right? And it would return the companies. And with the V2 API, a tenant, was a company, which was also a one-to-one, like with a service provider console company and a Cloud Connect tenant. But because of the use case where you might have multiple Cloud Connect environments, you have one customer who wants to have be able to send backups to each of those different environments. That's why we expanded on it, we improved upon it, and we separated those two out, right? And so I think what you'll find, especially in the V3 API, is that the nomenclature in the UI is going to match much more closely to nomenclature in the V3 API. So I think that'll work very well for you versus previously, like I mentioned before, V2, you'd get the tenants and it would show you the companies. You just had to know that those were one and the same. That's not really the case anymore. We did a pretty good job of whenever in that new version. So things should be readily available like that.
Great. And I think that we were able to answer all the questions, Chris, and I can only speak for myself, but every time I sit in and moderate one of these, I learn a ton of great information. So I'm assuming the folks on the call also did as well. And we thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. And we look forward to other conversations around these topics in the near future. So I'd like to thank you and everyone for their time.
Yeah, thanks everyone for attending. You have a good day.
Thank you.